Hi, good morning class. Welcome to my next lecture. That is lecture 2 of unit 1 for communication for management. So, in this lecture, today we are going to discuss about the process of communication and what are the barriers of communication. Process means that if we want to communicate in a professional manner, what is the best way to communicate, or what is the best way to make the communication effective, that we are going to discuss in the process of communication. And in barriers of communication, sometimes it is a kind of problem that takes place in number of business organization, that what the manager want to convey, that is not easily understandable by the workers, that what the manager want is not understandable by the workers, and what workers want, they are not understandable by the management. So there is a kind of a gap between the communication by the manager, and there is a gap between on the part of the workers as well. सो दैट इज़ नोन एज द बैरियर्स ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन, कि आप कहना तो कुछ और चाह रहे हैं, लेकिन जो भी सेंडर है उसने उस मैसेज को उस तरह से नहीं समझा जिस तरह से सेंडर ने कन्वे किया. तो दोनों के बीच में एक गैप आता है, एंड दैट गैप इज़ नोन एज अ बैरियर ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन which has to be improved to make the communication more effective. So in this session we are going to discuss about these two topics in detail. So the first is, this is the normal process of communication, कि अगर हम किसी से भी communicate करते हैं, then this is the normal process of communicating: sender, message, receiver, and the feedback. Sender means the person who is sending the message, that is known as a sender. Suppose I am taking a lecture, then for you I am the sender. Message is the content which I am delivering in verbal communication, and the content which I have given in the form of written communication. So that is known as the message. Receiver, the students who are attending this lecture, they are known as a receiver. And then feedback, if any student is having any query and that query comes to me, that is a feedback. So it is a complete ongoing continuous process. अब सेंडर ने जो भी मैसेज कन्वे किया, तो जब मैं आपको मैसेज कन्वे कर रही हूँ, सो दैट इज़ ऑन अ पार्ट ऑफ एनकोडिंग, एंड व्हेन दैट मैसेज इज वंस रिसीव्ड बाय द रिसीवर, सो दैट इज़ नोन एज डिकोडिंग. सेंडर की तरफ से एनकोडिंग होके मैसेज डिकोडिंग होकर रिसीवर के पास पहुंचता है. सो एनकोडिंग इज ऑन द पार्ट ऑफ सेंडर and decoding is on the part of receiver. So this is the normal process of communication, or you can say this is the normal process that how communication works. That means two important things, two important contents are there, that is the sender, message, receiver. So this is the cycle, or you can say this is the continuous ongoing cycle of process of communication. Now this is the process of communication which is being followed in different large scale organization: sender, encoding, message, channel, receiver, decoding. This is the complete cycle of communication process which we are going to discuss in detail. First is, communication is a continuous process which mainly involves three elements: sender, message, and receiver. This I have already told you. The elements involved in the communication process are explained below in detail. The first element is sender. the sender or the communicator generates the message and conveys it to the receiver. So if we take the example of this lecture, then I have generate the lecture and the content of the lecture in the form of PPT. That means I have generated the lecture for my students. So for me, my students are the receiver and I for my students is the sender. And message is the PowerPoint slide, and the content which I am delivering you from the slide, that is the message. So that means there is a sender, message and receiver. So the sender or the communicate generate the message and conveys it to the receiver. So if I am taking this lecture, so I have generated this lecture for my students, and the receiver for me is my students. Second is, he is the source and the one who starts the communication. Suppose if I have generated this lecture, but I am not going to explain anything, what is the result? It is a communication. Why? Because it is a form of written communication. There is a message as well. There is a form of written communication and there is a receiver also. But who is going to explain this? The process is not complete until and unless the explanation is gone up with this content. So this is known as the source. So I am the source and I am the one who is going to start the explanation of the content which I am giving you in the form of PowerPoint slide. So sender is one who generates the message for the receiver. Second is message. So message is the content which is going to be delivered to the receiver by the sender. So you can say that the slides which I am giving to you in the form of lecture, so that slide is known as the message, and the explanation which I am giving you, that is also known as a message. So a message is an idea, information, views, fact, feeling that is generated by the sender and then intended to be communicated further. I have prepared these slides, I have put the content, and then that content I have communicated further to my students. So this is known as message. Encoding. The message generated by the sender is encoded symbolically, such as in the form of words, pictures, gestures, etc. before it is being conveyed. If I am using only oral communication, so in oral communication I am using a certain sentences, words, examples. So these are the parts of encoding which helps the sender to generate the message which he is going to convey to the receiver. आप जो भी मैसेज रिसीवर को कन्वे करना चाहते हैं, उस मैसेज को बनाने के लिए आप जो वर्ड्स का, सेंटेंसेस का, पिक्चर्स का, इन सब का यूज़ करते हैं, तो वो सब कहलाता है एनकोडिंग. Those things which helps to make a message by the sender for the receiver is known as an encoding, right? Fourth is media. Media means the source through which we want to communicate our message to the receiver. कि हमारा जो भी मैसेज है, हम वो मैसेज किसके माध्यम से रिसीवर तक पहुंचाना चाहते हैं, तो वो आपका कहलाएगा मीडिया. और द सोर्स थ्रू विच वी वांट टू कम्युनिकेट आवर मैसेज टू द रिसीवर, so that mode is known as the media, and that can be telephone, internet, postal orders, fax, email. These are the resources through which the sender communicate his message to the receiver. So it is up to sender that what mode he is going to opt for communicating his message to the sender. Media means the mode through which the sender wants to communicate his message to the receiver. Decoding. It is the process of converting the symbols encoded by the sender. After decoding, the message is received by the receiver. So whatever the content I have used, whatever the words and sentences I have used in this lecture, so when that symbol, that words are encoded by the sender and then it is received by the receiver, so that is known as decoding. The message which is being conveyed by the sender, when that message is received by the receiver, that is known as a decoding. जब तक रिसीवर आपका मैसेज एक्सेप्ट नहीं करेगा या रिसीव नहीं करेगा, तब तक इट कैन नॉट बी टर्म्ड एज डिकोडिंग. So decoding is on the part of receiver and encoding is on the part of sender. Receiver. He is the person who is last in the chain and for whom the message was sent by the sender. So receiver is the person for whom the message is being prepared and to whom the sender is sending the message. So that person is known as receiver. For me, students are the receiver and for students I am the sender. Once the receiver receives the message and understands it in proper perspective and acts according to the message, only then the purpose of communication is successful. Whatever I am delivering in this lecture in the form of content in written communication and through verbal communication as well, when that lecture is completely understood by the students, then the process of communication is completed. So we can say that communication process is a chain that takes place one by one. If any step is missing, the process of communication is incomplete. That is sender, encoding, message, decoding, media, and then the receiver. So one by one has to be followed in a form of chain, and that complete change is known as a process of communication. Feedback. Feedback is whatever the sender wants to convey the message, when that message is received by the receiver and it is understood by the receiver, the process of communication is complete. कि आप जो भी कम्युनिकेट करना चाह रहे हैं वो आपने पूरी तरह कम्युनिकेट कर दिया और जिसको कम्युनिकेट करना चाह रहे हैं वो उस मैसेज को समझ पाया, तब आपका प्रोसेस ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन कंप्लीट हो गया. और जब उधर से यस आ जाएगा, सो दैट यस वर्ड इज नोन एज अ फीडबैक. नॉइस. It refers to any obstruction that is caused by the sender, message or receiver during the process of communication. किसी भी communication को डिस्टर्ब करने के लिए अगर जो elements यूज होते हैं, so that element is known as a kind of noise. That can be a sound of a music, that can be a sound of the person talking in a group, that can be a barking of a dog or a barking of a street dog near the apartment or near the house. So these all kind of hindrances which takes place in the process of communication, that is known as the noise caused by the sender message or received during the process of communication, that is known as the noise. For example, bad telephone connection, faulty encoding, faulty decoding, inattentive receiver, poor understanding of message due to prejudice or inappropriate gestures. For example, if anyone is calling on your mobile phone and then there is some network issue, so that network issue is a kind of obstruction which is caused by the sender message at the process of communication. So due to bad telephonic connection, you are not going to receive the message properly, so that is known as a obstruction. Now, barriers of communication. Barriers means कि मैसेज को कन्वे करने के बाद जब वो मैसेज पूरी तरह समझ में नहीं आता है रिसीवर को, और ना समझने की वजह से जो प्रॉब्लम्स होती हैं वो प्रॉब्लम्स कहलाती हैं बैरियर. दैट इज़ नोन एज अ बैरियर ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन. कि आपने करेक्ट मैसेज दिया लेकिन रिसीवर तक वो किसी भी इनकरेक्ट फॉर्म में पहुंचा है, जिसकी वजह से कोई भी मैसेज को अंडरस्टैंड करने में मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग हुई है. सो दैट इज़ नोन एज अ बैरियर इन कम्युनिकेशन. द कम्युनिकेशन बैरियर्स में प्रिवेंट कम्युनिकेशन और कैरी इनकरेक्ट मीनिंग ड्यू टू विच मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग्स में बी क्रिएटेड. दैट मीन्स the way in which sender want to send the message to the receiver, it is not accepted in that manner, so that is known as a barrier. The reason can be any reason. Therefore, it is essential for a manager to identify such barriers and take appropriate measures to overcome them. If you are facing any kind of such barriers, you just have to identify those barriers and try to remove those barriers accordingly. The barriers to communication in organization can be broadly grouped as. Now, what kind of barriers takes place in the organization that we are going to discuss? The first is the semantic barrier. These are concerned with the problems and obstructions in the process of encoding and decoding of a message into words or impression. So these are the problems which takes place at the time of encoding and decoding of a message. Normally such barriers result due to use of wrong words, faulty translations, different interpretations, etc. And these semantic barriers can be in the form of that you have used the wrong words but not intentionally. You have used that word but you have used in some other sense, but the receiver has taken that word in a negative sense. So that works as a semantic barrier. For example, a manager has to communicate with workers who have no knowledge of the English language, and on the other side he is not well conversant with the Hindi language. Here language is the barrier to communication, as the manager may not be able to communicate properly with the workers. So here the problem of language is known as the semantic barrier. एग्जाम्पल क्या है कि एक मैनेजर अपने वर्कर्स से कम्युनिकेट करना चाहता है, बट द मैनेजर कैन ओनली स्पीक इंग्लिश एंड द वर्कर्स कैन ओनली स्पीक हिंदी. वर्कर्स को इंग्लिश नहीं आती और मैनेजर को हिंदी नहीं आती. So there is a problem of communication between the manager and the worker. So that is the form of which problem? Language problem. So here language is known as the barrier for communication, because the manager may not be able to communicate properly to the workers. Why? Because he don't know Hindi and workers don't know English. So here language works as a barrier in the process of communication. Psychological barrier. Emotional or psychological factors also act as barriers to communication. The state of mind of both sender and receiver of communication reflects in effective communication. If the state of mind of both the sender and the receiver is good, then the process of communication takes place in the effective manner. If any of the person, either the sender or the receiver, is having some disturbance in his mind, then that communication cannot be effective communication, because the person who is communicating is not in a good state of mind. So that is known as a psychological barrier. For example, कि कभी कभी आप ऑफिस जाने से पहले आपका मूड ख़राब हो जाता है, और ऑफिस जाने के बाद आपका बॉस आपसे कुछ कहता है, यू आर नॉट गोइंग टू टेक इट इन अ पॉजिटिव मैनर. वाई? बिकॉज योर स्टेट ऑफ माइंड इज़ नॉट गुड. सो दैट इज़ नोन एज अ साइकोलॉजिकल बैरियर. कि जब प्रोसेस ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन होता है, उस प्रोसेस ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन में सेंडर या रिसीवर की स्टेट ऑफ माइंड ठीक नहीं होती है, या ही इज़ इन अ डिस्टर्बेंस due to any of the reason, so that is known as a psychological barrier. So at the time of communication, both the sender and the receiver need to be psychologically sound. Also, they should trust each other. If they do not believe each other, they cannot understand the other's message in its original sense. So psychological barrier वो बैरियर होते हैं कि जब दो लोग आपस में कम्युनिकेट करते हैं और वो दोनों आपस में गुस्से से बात कर रहे हैं, या जो मैसेज सेंडर दे रहा है उसको रिसीवर प्रॉपरली एक्सेप्ट नहीं कर रहा है ड्यू टू एनी ऑफ द रीज़न, तो ये सारे बैरियर्स आपके होते हैं साइकोलॉजिकल बैरियर. So once there is a process of communication, both the sender and the receiver should be in a good state of mind, and they should trust each other. And if they do not trust each other, they cannot understand the message which the sender wants to give to the receiver. So the state of mind can be regarded as a psychological barrier. Organizational barriers. The factors related to organizational structure, rules and regulations, authority relationship, etc. may sometimes act as barriers to effective communication. किसी भी कंपनी में आपकी रूल्स और रेगुलेशंस होते हैं कि आपको 9 बजे एंट्री करनी है, 9 बजे के बाद अगर आप एंट्री करते हैं दैन आपकी सैलरी कटेगी, या देयर इज़ अ प्रोविजन ऑफ हाफ डे लीव. If continuous 3 days, if a person is coming late in the organization, then half day salary will be cut. So these are the rules and regulations, which is known as the organizational structure. So those issues which takes place by some of these or due to these organizational structures, so those are known as the organizational barriers. In an organization with a highly centralized pattern, people may not be encouraged to have free communication. Yes, if the business organization is very large, so in that organization, people are not comfortable in communicating freely. They are used to communicate with the boss or the supervisor under which the person is working. Also, rigid rules and regulations and cumbersome procedures may also become a hurdle to communication. If the rules and regulations are too tough that people are not satisfied with those rules and regulations, so that is also a kind of organizational barrier. तो किसी भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में काम करने वाले लोग जब वहाँ की पॉलिसीज़, रूल्स या रेगुलेशन से सेटिस्फाइड नहीं होते हैं, तो वो सारी चीज़ें कहलाते हैं ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल बिहेवियर. वो सारे डिस्टर्बेंसेस जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में होते हैं एट द टाइम ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन, सो दैट इज़ नोन एज एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल बैरियर. Personal barrier. The personal factors of both sender and receiver may act as a barrier to effective communication. If a superior thinks that a particular communication may adversely affect his authority, he may suppress such communication. So पर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन की जहाँ पर आप किसी भी बंदे से कम्युनिकेट कर रहे हो, लेकिन आपके माइंड में ये है कि अगर मैंने इस बंदे से इस तरह का कम्युनिकेशन किया तो इससे मेरी पर्सनल रेपुटेशन या मेरी प्रोफेशनल इमेज पे फ़र्क पड़ेगा. सो दैट मीन्स यू आर थिंकिंग योर सेल्फ एज अ पर्सन, एज अ पर्सनल. सो दैट इज़ नोन एज अ पर्सनल बैरियर, कि आप वो कम्युनिकेशन नहीं करते हैं कि जहाँ पर आपकी इमेज खतरे में होने का खतरा होता है, तो वो आप कम्युनिकेशन अवॉइड करते हैं. बट दैट कम्युनिकेशन इज़ good for the organization, but it is not good on the part of the sender. So that is known as a personal barrier. Also, if the superiors do not have confidence in the competency of their subordinates, they may not ask for their advice. If the superiors are not confident for his team, so that superior cannot ask any kind of suggestions from his team. Why? Because he is not confident for his team. The subordinates may not be willing to offer useful suggestions in the absence of any reward or appreciation for the suggestion. Subordinates जो हैं उनके माइंड में कभी कभी बहुत अच्छे अच्छे आइडियाज़ आते हैं, बट they are not willing to discuss that idea with their superiors. Why? Because there is a no provision of reward. कि अगर वर्कर ने या किसी भी ए एम्प्लॉई है, सपोज देयर इज़ अ एम्प्लॉय ए, और उसने एक बहुत ही अच्छा सजेशन दिया अपने सुपीरियर को. सुपीरियर ने वो सजेशन जाके मैनेजमेंट से शेयर किया, मैनेजमेंट को अच्छा लगा और उसने वो सजेशन इम्प्लीमेंट कर दिया. तो उस सजेशन को इम्प्लीमेंट करने का रिवॉर्ड किसको मिला? मैनेजर को. लेकिन एक्चुअली वो आइडिया किसका था? एम्प्लॉय ए का. तो एम्प्लॉय ए शुड बी रिवॉर्डेड, बट इन दिस केस द मैनेजर हैज रिवॉर्डेड फॉर द आइडिया विच इज बीइंग कन्वेड बाय द एम्प्लॉय ए. सो इन एब्सेंस ऑफ रिवॉर्ड फॉर द आइडिया or the absence of appreciation can also lead to the personal barrier. So this is all for this lecture. Now we will meet in the next lecture for communication for management. But always be in a habit of revision. Try to revise the lecture twice a day. And if you have any query, then do let me know. Then we will give one query handling session. Till then, stay safe. Thank you, class. Have a nice day.